The reception area of Hillside Academy gleamed with polished marble floors and towering glass windows. James Carter stood near the entrance, adjusting his tie in a mirror that reflected the bustling parents and staff passing by. He had chosen a simple navy suit for the evening, intentionally understated. James wasn't here to impress anyone with his wealth. He was here for his son. "Excuse me, sir," a young receptionist called, her tone polite but curt. "May I help you?" Her eyes flicked to James's shoes and then back to his face, her smile tight. "Yes, I'm here for the parents' meeting," James replied, his voice steady. "Michael Carter's father." "Right," she said, typing quickly on her computer. "The meeting is in the main hall, straight down the corridor." Without another word, she returned to her tasks, her tone dismissing him like he was an afterthought. James ignored it. This wasn't about him. It was about Michael, his bright and ambitious 14-year-old who had been struggling lately. Michael had always been a confident student and an exceptional basketball player, but over the past few months, James had noticed a change. His son's spark seemed dimmed, his enthusiasm for school waning. After weeks of probing, Michael finally admitted to being overlooked for the starting lineup on the basketball team despite outperforming his peers. His academic achievements were also being overshadowed, with teachers barely acknowledging his contributions in class. James had heard enough. Tonight, he was determined to confront the school's leadership. As he entered the hall, a hush settled over the room. Rows of parents sat in neatly arranged chairs, their conversations muted as the school director, Mr. Peterson, took the stage. A tall man with silver hair and an air of self-importance, Peterson scanned the audience with an icy gaze. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Peterson began, his voice dripping with authority. "We're here to discuss the continued excellence of Hillside Academy and address any concerns from our esteemed community." James took a seat near the back, observing the dynamic in the room. Most of the attendees were dressed in designer clothing, their every move exuding confidence and privilege. When Peterson opened the floor for questions, hands shot up immediately. "Yes, Mrs. Hanover," Peterson called, pointing to a woman in a Chanel blazer. "I'm concerned about the budget for the arts program," she said. "Our children deserve the best opportunities to express their creativity." Peterson nodded, offering her a practiced smile. "An excellent point, Mrs. Hanover. We've allocated additional funds for next semester, ensuring our students have access to world-class resources." The exchange continued, with Peterson skillfully navigating questions from parents who appeared more interested in flaunting their connections than addressing substantive issues. James waited patiently, his hand finally rising after several minutes. "Yes, in the back," Peterson said, squinting as if trying to identify who had spoken. "You are?" "James Carter," he said, standing. "Michael Carter's father." A murmur ran through the room as eyes turned toward him. Peterson's expression tightened, his lips curling into a barely concealed smirk. "Ah, yes. And what's your question, Mr. Carter?" "I'm concerned about the school's commitment to fairness and inclusion," James began, his tone calm but firm. "My son has been facing challenges that seem rooted in bias. For example, he's consistently outperformed his peers in basketball tryouts, but remains on the bench. Similarly, his academic achievements are often overlooked by his teachers." The room fell silent. Peterson raised an eyebrow, his demeanor shifting from polite to condescending. "Mr. Carter, Hillside Academy prides itself on meritocracy. I assure you, every decision regarding sports and academics is made based on performance." "With respect, that doesn't align with what I've observed," James countered. "I'd like to know what steps the school is taking to ensure all students are treated equitably." Peterson sighed, clearly annoyed. "Mr. Carter, while I appreciate your concern, Hillside Academy has a rigorous system in place. If your son is facing difficulties, perhaps he could apply himself more. Success here requires resilience." A ripple of laughter passed through the audience, subtle but unmistakable. James clenched his jaw but kept his composure. "Resilience isn't the issue," he replied. "The issue is systemic bias." Peterson's smile faded, replaced by an edge of irritation. "Perhaps this isn't the appropriate forum for such grievances. If you'd like, we can schedule a private meeting to discuss your son's progress." "I've tried that," James said evenly. My emails and calls go unanswered. The tension in the room was palpable now, but Peterson dismissed it with a wave of his hand. I think we've addressed this sufficiently for tonight. Moving on. I'm not finished, James interrupted, his voice firm enough to cut through the murmurs. The experiences of students like Michael deserve to be heard, not brushed aside. Peterson's face flushed, and he straightened, his tone icy. Mr. Carter, I must remind you that this is a space for constructive dialogue, not accusations. If you cannot conduct yourself appropriately, I'll have to ask you to leave. I'm conducting myself just fine, James shot back. What I'm asking for is accountability. Enough! Peterson barked, his patience clearly gone. Security, please escort Mr. Carter out. Gasps echoed through the hall as a security guard approached. James didn't resist. He simply picked up his coat, his calm demeanor intact, and walked toward the exit. Before leaving, he turned to face Peterson one last time. This isn't over, he said quietly but with unmistakable resolve. Outside the hall, James leaned against the wall, taking a moment to gather himself. He thought of Michael, his son's shy smile, and boundless potential. They had underestimated him tonight, but they wouldn't see what was coming next. This fight wasn't just for Michael, it was for every student who deserved better. And James Carter didn't lose fights. The night air was crisp as James Carter walked to his car, his thoughts swirling with a mix of anger and determination. The humiliation from Peterson's dismissive attitude lingered, but James wasn't one to let emotions cloud his judgment. He needed a plan, one that would expose the hypocrisy and negligence festering within Hillside Academy. The next morning, James sat at the kitchen table with Michael, who was quietly eating cereal while scrolling through his tablet. "Hey, champ," James began, trying to sound casual. "How's basketball practice going? Coach still keeping you on the bench?" Michael shrugged, not looking up. "Yeah, but it's whatever. I'm used to it." James felt a pang of guilt. "You shouldn't be used to it. You're one of the best players on that team." "Doesn't matter, Dad," Michael said, his voice tinged with resignation. "Coach has his favorites, and I'm not one of them." James leaned forward. "What about your teachers? That history project you worked so hard on. Didn't you say you got one of the top scores in the class?" Michael finally looked up, his face a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Yeah, but Mr. Lawson didn't even announce it. He just gave me my grade and moved on." Meanwhile, Sarah and Ethan got awards for their presentations. James's jaw tightened. "That's not right, Michael. You're being overlooked, and it's not because of your performance." Michael hesitated, then said quietly, "Maybe it's just because I don't fit in there." James reached across the table and placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "You fit in wherever you choose to be, Michael. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise. I'll handle this." Later that day, James drove to Hillside Academy without an appointment. His plan wasn't fully formed, but he needed more information before taking his next steps. When he arrived, the school secretary, a middle-aged woman with a pinched expression, looked up from her desk. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone less than welcoming. "I'd like to speak with Coach Daniels," James said. The secretary frowned. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I won't take much of his time," James replied firmly. After a moment of hesitation, she picked up the phone and dialed. "Coach Daniels? There's Mr. Carter here to see you." She listened, nodded, and then turned to James. "He'll meet you on the field." James thanked her and made his way to the sprawling outdoor facilities. Coach Daniels was standing near the sidelines, clipboard in hand, overseeing a group of students running drills. "Coach Daniels," James called as he approached. The coach glanced up, his face tightening when he recognized James. "Mr. Carter, what can I do for you?" James wasted no time. "I'd like to understand why Michael, one of the top performers during tryouts, isn't getting a fair chance on the team." Coach Daniels sighed and crossed his arms. "Look, Michael's a good kid. He's got potential, but I have to consider team dynamics. Some of the other boys have been playing together for years, and I can't just disrupt that chemistry." "Chemistry?" James repeated, his voice incredulous. "You're telling me it's about chemistry when my son outperformed half your starters during tryouts?" Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "It's not just about performance, Mr. Carter. It's about leadership, experience, Stop, James interrupted, his voice sharp. We both know what this is really about. You're holding my son back because he doesn't look like the other boys on this team. Daniels bristled. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Carter. I run this team based on merit. Merit? James shot back. Then show me the stats. Show me anything that justifies benching Michael when he's consistently outperformed your so-called leaders. The coach hesitated, clearly caught off guard. This conversation is over, he said, turning back toward the field. No, it's not, James said firmly. I'll be bringing this to the school board. You've made it clear that fairness doesn't matter to you. James's next stop was the administration office, where he requested a meeting with Mr. Lawson, Michael's history teacher. After a brief wait, Lawson emerged from his classroom, looking annoyed. Mr. Carter, he said with a tight smile. What brings you here? James didn't mince words. I want to know why my son's accomplishments in your class aren't being recognized. Lawson blinked, clearly unprepared for the direct approach. Michael is doing well academically, but I try to focus on encouraging all students equally. That's not what Michael's experiencing, James countered. He feels invisible in your classroom, despite his hard work and top performance. Lawson's smile faltered. I assure you, I treat all my students fairly. Do you? James asked pointedly. Because from where I stand, it looks like you're playing favorites, and Michael isn't one of them. Lawson's face flushed. Mr. Carter, I think you're misunderstanding. I understand perfectly, James interrupted. Michael's achievements are being ignored, and it's affecting his confidence. If you can't see the harm in that, maybe you shouldn't be teaching. Before Lawson could respond, James turned on his heel and walked away, his resolve hardening with every step. That evening, James sat at his desk, reviewing notes he'd taken throughout the day. His frustration was tempered by a growing clarity. Hillside Academy's leadership and culture were deeply flawed, and the only way to address it was to challenge it head-on. His phone buzzed with a message from an old friend, Linda Monroe, who happened to sit on the school's board of directors. Linda, heard about the parents' meeting. Call me. James dialed her number immediately. James, Linda said as she answered. I'm so sorry about what happened last night. Peterson had no right to treat you that way. Thanks, Linda, James said, his voice steady. But I'm not calling to complain. I need your help. What do you need? I need access to the next board meeting, James said. No warnings, no introductions. Just get me in the room. Linda hesitated. You're planning something, aren't you? Damn right I am, James replied. And they won't see it coming? Linda sighed but finally agreed. All right, I'll make it happen. But James, be careful. These people don't like being challenged. Neither do I, James said, a quiet determination in his voice. As he hung up, James leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, Hillside Academy would learn exactly who they were dealing with. The boardroom at Hillside Academy exuded the same air of exclusivity as the rest of the school. Dark oak furniture, a glittering chandelier, and walls lined with portraits of past directors created an intimidating ambience. James Carter entered the room with measured steps, his calm exterior masking the storm brewing within him. Seated around the table were the members of the board, a mix of polished professionals and wealthy benefactors. At the head sat Mr. Peterson, his posture stiff, his expression as self-assured as ever. He hadn't been informed of James's presence at this meeting, which had been strategically scheduled by Linda Monroe. The murmurs around the room ceased when Linda stood to address the group. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin our agenda, I'd like to introduce someone who has requested to speak, Linda said, her tone neutral but commanding. Mr. James Carter, a prominent member of our school community. Peterson's eyebrows shot up, his confusion quickly replaced by disdain. Prominent? I wasn't aware Mr. Carter held any notable position here. James smiled faintly, stepping into the circle of chairs. Good evening, everyone, he began, his voice calm but resonant. I'm here today not just as Michael Carter's father, but as someone deeply invested in the future of this institution. Peterson's scoff was audible. Mr. Carter, while we appreciate parent involvement, this meeting is for the board to discuss operational matters, not personal grievances. Linda interjected smoothly. Actually, Mr. Carter has every right to be here. He's our largest single investor." The room went silent. Peterson froze, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. "Investor?" Peterson echoed, his voice faltering. "Surely there's been some mistake." James's smile grew sharper. "No mistake, Mr. Peterson. For the past 3 years, I've contributed significant funds to Hillside Academy under a trust. My goal was to support the school's mission of academic excellence and inclusivity. Unfortunately, I've come to realize that the latter is severely lacking." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Peterson's jaw tightened, but he quickly recovered. "If you have concerns, Mr. Carter, they could have been addressed privately. There's no need to disrupt this meeting." James stepped closer, his gaze locked on Peterson. "I tried addressing them privately. Emails went unanswered. Calls were ignored. And when I raised these issues at the parents' meeting, I was humiliated and thrown out." Gasps and whispers filled the room as James's words hung in the air. Linda's steady gaze kept the group grounded. James placed a folder on the table and opened it, revealing documents, emails, and a detailed report. "What I've brought today are examples of systemic bias and negligence under your leadership, Mr. Peterson. These are just a few of the cases I've uncovered, starting with my sons." He flipped to a page with statistics and rosters. Michael Carter consistently ranked among the top performers in basketball tryouts. Yet he remains benched while less capable players take the court. When questioned, the coach gave vague excuses about team dynamics. James turned another page. Academically, Michael achieved the highest score on a history project in his class. Yet no recognition was given, while other students received awards for lesser work. Peterson shifted uncomfortably, but James didn't stop. "These aren't isolated incidents. I've spoken with other parents, many of whom shared similar stories. Minority students at Hillside are being overlooked, undervalued, and held to different standards." "That's enough," Peterson barked, slamming his hand on the table. "These accusations are baseless and inflammatory. Hillside Academy operates with the utmost integrity." "Does it?" James shot back, his voice rising for the first time. "Because what I see is a pattern of exclusion and elitism. And as the school's largest investor, I demand accountability." The tension in the room was electric. Peterson's face turned red, but before he could retort, another board member spoke up. "Mr. Carter," said a woman with silver-framed glasses, "you've presented compelling evidence. These concerns cannot be ignored." James nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. I'm not here to tear this school down. I'm here to ensure it becomes the inclusive, equitable institution it claims to be." Linda leaned forward. "I propose we vote on a motion to conduct a full investigation into these allegations and Mr. Peterson's handling of diversity and inclusion at Hillside." "You can't be serious," Peterson snapped. "This is absurd." James met his gaze evenly. "What's absurd is a director who dismisses legitimate concerns, alienates families, and jeopardizes the school's reputation." The room erupted into debate, with voices clashing as board members deliberated. Peterson's allies were outnumbered, and within minutes, the motion passed. James turned to Peterson one last time. "Your leadership has failed this community. If you truly care about Hillside Academy, you'll step aside and let real progress happen." Peterson's lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing. In the days that followed, the school announced Peterson's resignation. Dr. Monica Harris, a respected educator with a background in equity and reform, was appointed as the new director. Her first action was to meet with parents and students, promising to rebuild trust and create a culture of belonging. James remained involved, helping to establish a parent-led committee to oversee diversity initiatives. Meanwhile, Michael thrived under the new leadership. His confidence returned, and he earned a starting position on the basketball team. At home one evening, Michael approached James, his face glowing with excitement. "Dad, Coach just told me I'm starting in the next game." James smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "That's because you earned it, son. You always had it in you." Michael hesitated, then hugged his father tightly. "Thanks for fighting for me, Dad. For all of us." James held him close, his resolve stronger than ever. Hillside Academy's transformation was just beginning, and he was ready to see it through. The transformation at Hillside Academy began slowly but gained momentum like a powerful wave. Dr. Monica Harris, the newly appointed director, wasted no time in implementing changes that rippled across every facet of the school. Parents, staff, and students noticed the difference almost immediately, though not everyone welcomed it. For James Carter, the work was far from over. He joined the newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Committee, a group of parents, teachers, and board members tasked with monitoring the school's progress. Despite the initial success of Peterson's removal, James knew deep-rooted cultural issues wouldn't disappear overnight. It was during one of these committee meetings that resistance reared its head. "I still don't see why this is necessary," said Mr. Donovan, a parent who had been vocal in opposing Peterson's dismissal. A tall man with a booming voice, Donovan represented a faction of the parent body resistant to change. Hillside has always been a top-tier institution. We don't need to overhaul the system just because a few people feel left out. James sat across from him, calm but resolute. "This isn't about a few people, Mr. Donovan. It's about creating an environment where every student feels valued and has the opportunity to succeed." Donovan scoffed. "Oh, please. This is just about pandering. The real world doesn't hand out participation trophies." Before James could respond, Dr. Harris stepped in. "Mr. Donovan, this isn't about lowering standards. It's about ensuring that our standards are applied equitably. Every child here deserves to be recognized for their talents, regardless of background." James leaned forward. "Exactly. Take my son, Michael. He's a top athlete and a strong student, but under the previous leadership, he was overlooked simply because he didn't fit the mold. How many other students have had the same experience?" The room fell silent as James's words sank in. Donovan shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing further. Outside the meeting, James found Michael waiting for him near the car. "How'd it go?" Michael asked, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. James chuckled. "Progress is slow, but we're getting there." Michael hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" James paused, looking at his son thoughtfully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but when something's worth fighting for, you don't give up. You push through." Michael nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "I get it. Thanks for doing this, Dad. For me." James placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Not just for you, son. For every kid who deserves better." Meanwhile, Dr. Harris continued implementing changes, starting with mandatory diversity training for all staff. The sessions were met with mixed reactions. "This feels like a waste of time," muttered one teacher as James observed from the back of the room. Dr. Harris didn't miss a beat. "If understanding and respecting the experiences of your students feels like a waste of time, then perhaps this isn't the right place for you." The room fell silent, her words hanging heavy in the air. James couldn't help but smile. He'd made the right choice supporting Dr. Harris. As weeks turned into months, the school began hosting events aimed at fostering unity and understanding. One such event was Cultural Appreciation Day, where students and their families were invited to share aspects of their heritage. Michael volunteered to present, surprising even James with his enthusiasm. On the day of the event, Michael stood in front of a packed auditorium, his nerves barely visible as he spoke about his family's history. "My dad taught me something important," Michael said, his voice steady, "that you don't have to fit in to stand out, and that it's okay to be proud of who you are, even when others don't see your worth." The applause that followed was thunderous. James watched from the back, his chest swelling with pride. Not everyone embraced the changes at Hillside. A small group of parents began circulating petitions to reverse some of Dr. Harris's policies, claiming they were distracting from academic priorities. James addressed the issue during a community forum. "This isn't a distraction," he said, standing before a room full of parents. "This is about strengthening our school. If we want Hillside to be the best, we can't afford to ignore the voices of our students and families. Excellence isn't just about grades or trophies. It's about character." His words resonated with many in the room, though a few skeptical faces remained. On the basketball court, Michael's confidence soared under his new coach, who emphasized teamwork and skill over politics. In one memorable game, Michael led his team to victory with a last-second three-pointer, earning a standing ovation from the crowd. Afterward, As James hugged his son, a parent approached them. "Mr. Carter," she said, extending her hand, "I wanted to thank you. My daughter told me how much more comfortable she feels at school now. The changes you pushed for, they're making a difference." James shook her hand, humbled. "I'm glad to hear that. It's what we're working toward." At the next committee meeting, Linda Monroe shared updates on the school's progress. "Dr. Harris has made significant strides," she said. "Enrollment is up, and we're receiving positive feedback from families." James nodded. "Good, but we can't let up. This isn't a one-time fix. It's a commitment we need to uphold." The group agreed, their determination renewed. Later that evening, James sat in his study, reflecting on how far they'd come. Hillside Academy wasn't perfect, but it was changing. And that change wasn't just about policies. It was about people, about ensuring that no student ever felt invisible again. As he turned off the light, James thought of Michael's words. "Thanks for fighting for me." This fight was far from over, but James was ready for whatever came next. The auditorium of Hillside Academy was filled with excited chatter and the shuffling of parents, students, and faculty as the class of graduating seniors prepared to take the stage. Banners with the words "Class of Excellence," "Class of Unity" hung proudly from the walls, a reflection of the school's transformation over the past year. James Carter sat in the front row, dressed in a tailored suit, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Michael, standing tall among his peers. His son's confidence had blossomed, and it was evident in the way he carried himself. James couldn't help but feel a surge of pride, knowing the journey they had both undertaken to reach this moment. The ceremony began with speeches from faculty and student representatives, but the room truly came alive when Michael approached the podium as the class valedictorian. "Good evening, everyone," Michael began, his voice clear and steady. "When I first came to Hillside Academy, I didn't know where I fit in. I was excited, nervous, and ready to prove myself. But for a while, it felt like no matter how hard I tried, I was invisible." The room grew quiet, his words hanging in the air. "I thought maybe I wasn't good enough," he continued. "Maybe I just didn't belong. But someone reminded me that my worth isn't determined by how others see me. It's about how I see myself." Michael glanced at his father, a smile playing on his lips. "My dad taught me that when you face challenges, you don't shrink. You rise. And you don't just rise for yourself. You rise for everyone who comes after you." Applause erupted, but Michael wasn't finished. "This year wasn't just about me. It was about change. It was about creating a school where every student feels like they matter, where every voice is heard. And we've made progress. Hillside Academy is stronger now because we chose to grow together." As he concluded his speech, the audience gave him a standing ovation. James's chest swelled with pride as he wiped away a tear. After the ceremony, the Carter family gathered with friends and faculty in the courtyard. Dr. Monica Harris approached James with a warm smile. "You must be incredibly proud of Michael," she said. "I am," James replied, "but I'm just as proud of what this school has become." "Thank you for leading the charge, Dr. Harris." She shook her head. "This transformation wouldn't have happened without you. You didn't just fight for Michael. You fought for all of us." Nearby, Michael was surrounded by teammates and classmates, his laughter ringing through the air. James watched, his heart full. In the months that followed, Hillside Academy continued its upward trajectory. Dr. Harris introduced a scholarship program for underrepresented students, ensuring that the school's doors were open to a diverse range of talent and ambition. Faculty underwent ongoing training, and the curriculum expanded to include courses on cultural awareness and social equity. James remained an active presence, mentoring other parents and advocating for systemic improvements. The Diversity and Inclusion Committee became a permanent fixture, its efforts shaping the school's policies and culture for years to come. Years later, Michael's success story became an inspiration for the entire community. As a college graduate and rising star in his chosen field, he often returned to Hillside Academy to speak to students about resilience and self-worth. At one such event, a young student approached him. "Mr. Carter," the boy said, clutching a notebook, "how did you keep going when things got hard?" Michael smiled, his father's words echoing in his mind. "Because I had someone who believed in me, and because I believed that things could get better, not just for me, but for everyone, James Carter's legacy at Hillside Academy wasn't just about the changes he helped enact. It was about the lives he touched and the future he helped shape. The school, once a symbol of exclusivity, had become a beacon of opportunity and inclusion, a testament to what could be achieved when one person stood up and refused to back down. As James sat on the sidelines of another graduation years later, watching a new generation of students walk across the stage, he knew one thing for certain: the fight had been worth it. And it always would be.